Time.
This A.C.T. program was presented on February 27, 1991 in Philadelphia, Mississippi for educators of the Philadelphia, Mississippi Public School System. Your lecturer, Peter Z. Orton, author and educator, has presented test preparation programs for departments of education, universities, and school districts throughout the nation.
So tonight, what I wanted to do was do two things, essentially. Talk about the format of the new test. It has changed significantly, and you should be aware of the changes. And then, for the second part of the evening, and probably for the longest part of the evening, show you some of the techniques that are in all the books. And they're in all the films that are out there, and they're in all the materials and computer programs. And they're not, they're not secret. You can teach them to your students. You can develop workshops with your teachers. If you're an administrator, there's no reason why you can't share this with a math teacher or an English teacher to share it with your students. What I would like to point out is that these are the four elements of any good workshop. To familiarize your students with the test, so when they go in, there are no surprises. They know exactly the kinds of questions that will be on the exam and what's being tested. You will also provide, and this is extremely important, a review of the basic skills. That when they go in to take the test, they know what they know. They know that algebra, for instance, algebra 1 and 2, trigonometry, intuitive geometry, arithmetic will be on the math. If there are things that areas that they are weak in and need improvement, this is an opportunity for you to improve those skills. But I also maintain that doing well on this test will be determined also by what they don't know. In terms of, if they know they don't know how to do a problem, if they look at a problem and say, that's trigonometry, I have never taken trigonometry, then they won't be spending time on that question. And we're going to talk a great deal about knowing what you don't know as being a very important part of taking this exam. The third facet of your program, hopefully, will be introducing the test-taking techniques, some of which we're going to talk about tonight. And the last, and just as important, is providing them opportunities to practice these techniques under severe time pressure, under test pressure. And in fact, today we're going to be doing that right here because it's very instructive to see what students are under, the kind of time pressure and test pressure they're under when they have to answer, for example, 45 questions in 35 minutes and at the same time read 4 long passages that those questions are based on. Most students say 4 long and boring passages that those questions are based on. I would like to walk you through the materials first, very, very briefly. You should each have 3 books. We'll be using this one, this A.C.T. Prep Guide, and as I said, there are lots of these out there in the market, many different types. This math review book is a wonderful review of arithmetic, algebra 1, and geometry, plain geometry. However, it does not cover algebra 2, and it does not cover trigonometry. Be aware that if you're going to do a thorough math review, and you will need other materials. I point that out to you so you can make your choices accordingly. It is a wonderful review, however, for arithmetic, algebra 1, and geometry. And in fact, many students can work through this kind of book individually without having to work through the whole book. For example, there are diagnostic tests in this book. For example, if I may call your attention to page 9. This is the math review book. It says on page 9, there are 19 questions on page 9, and it begins to cover the fundamentals of arithmetic, and it goes up to page 11, up to 50 questions. If I were a student and I was working through these, and suppose I would have trouble with question number 13, just suppose, where it says change 5 3/4 to an improper fraction. Notice on the answer page 11, question 13, not only gives you the answer, 23/4, but also provides a page number, page 28. And therefore, what a student can do is turn to page 28, and on page 28 there is a review of how to change fractions, improper fractions, to mixed numerals. And so students can work through this kind of book individually and doesn't have to work through all of arithmetic or all of algebra or all of geometry. And this makes for a time-effective review. It's the kind of thing that can be very helpful in a workshop where students will very easily get bored if you're going to walk them through all the arithmetic, all the algebra, all the geometry. What you really want to do is you want to spark these students by showing them the techniques that they don't know that will work on a test and say, this is the kind of materials you need to individually review the basics. Because if you don't have the basic skills, the techniques won't work. Okay? The verbal review, the first 130 pages, has a wonderful review of usage, grammar, sentence structure, diction. Some of the other parts won't be appropriate because they are for the, for instance, there's essay writing in here. This is a nice book, a nice chapter to have, but it's not appropriate for the A.C.T. So if you buy any materials, you'll have to use them selectively. This book is wonderful for the A.C.T., and I would like to walk you through this very briefly in a bit. You should also have this handout, Setting Up Your Own A.C.T. Prep Workshop, and in fact, that's the reason for us being here. There are two different workshops here. One has a 4 meeting, one is an 8 meeting, and you can alter this and change this and trim this and revise this however it may best suit your needs. They give you all the page numbers, so if you're putting together any kind of curriculum yourself, you don't have to be flipping around the book. It's all right here. And any help you might need, you can most likely, I believe there's a number on the other side, you can call them and they can assist you. I would like you to turn in your A.C.T. book to page 3, and we're going to very briefly and very quickly discuss the format of the exam so that we can spend the next 2 hours talking about the actual strategies that work wonderfully for the test. On page 3, it says, format of the enhanced A.C.T. This is exactly what your students will face when they go in and take this test. English test, 45 minutes. 75 questions to answer in 45 minutes. And therein is the first insight, major insight about this test. It is a speed test. Test makers have two types of tests, essentially. Power tests and speed tests. Power tests is where a candidate has the opportunity to sit and mull over questions and give quality thought, as much quality thought as they need to answer questions. And indeed, as educators, I'm sure you're aware that that's probably a better indication of your students' ability to do work. Students work at different speeds. We all work at different speeds. Having to answer 75 questions in 45 minutes places emphasis perhaps in areas that we don't like to place in the classroom. When you give students an assignment, you like them to take care and take quality thought, and this is the first problem that students have with this test. And that's why the techniques we talk about today are all geared for speed. They're geared, there are sometimes several ways to get a correct answer on an A.C.T. exam. There's a fast way and there are several slow ways. And what you want to show your students is that some of these questions are made to be answered in 20, 30 seconds. And if you don't, and you want to look for that technique quickly, if you don't find it, you probably don't want to spend 2 minutes, 3 minutes working on the question, even if you can get it correct. In fact, the second most important insight about this test is you don't have to work all the questions to get a good score. So many of our students feel compulsive. They've got to get them all done. To do well on this test, as you'll see, requires you to get 2/3 to 3/4 right. You can do well on this test. And of course, it depends on what school you want to get, your students want to get into. But they don't have to get 95% to get a terrific score. And that's an important insight for students. They realize, gee, I don't have to work these terrible problems, these 5 terrible problems. I can do very well by leaving these. And we're going to talk about that technique. So, English test, there will be 75 questions, and they will look something like this. And later on tonight, when you go home, or tomorrow, you might want to look through this very carefully. Here's what the test looks like. Notice there'll be columns on the left of copy, of paragraphs, and on the right, there'll be choices, many of which start off with no change. And what they're going to do is they're going to read these passages. And there's lots of pages, passages, And they're going to answer questions based upon the underlined sections. Some of these underlined phrases and words will be incorrect because of their usage will be incorrect, their diction will be incorrect, their sentence structure may be incorrect, their grammar may be incorrect, or their meaning may be incorrect. They will choose from among the answers on the right the correct answer. Some of these questions are extremely time-consuming, extremely difficult. And the better students are wise to leave those questions for last if they have time. You should urge your students not to feel compelled to answer them all in the order in which they come. And we'll talk more about this later. 40 of the questions will be the grammar usage type of questions. 35 of the questions will be what are called rhetorical questions. They're questions based on the organization of the passage or the style of the passage. And many students find these to be particularly difficult and particularly time-consuming. We're going to see some examples of this when we do our strategies. Section 2, mathematics, 60 minutes, 60 questions. Even a lousy math student will tell you that's only a minute a question. 60 questions in 60 minutes. That's not a lot of time. This is the typical kind of question students have seen their whole life. If John can paint a house in 4 hours, Mary can paint the same house in 5 hours. If they work together and don't fall in love, how long will it take them to paint the house? You've seen those, right? Believe it or not, there are wonderful strategies that can be used, not necessarily for the math, but for multiple choice questions of this nature that I never learned when I was in school and that most students don't know. Now, these strategies will work wonderfully if the students also have the basic skills. If they don't have the basic skills, the strategies won't work at all. So if they have the basic skills of arithmetic, algebra 1 and 2, geometry and trigonometry, these techniques will go a long way in letting them use these skills. And we're going to do a lot of work on this a little later. Then notice section 3 is a reading test. They will be given 4 passages of several hundred words each. If you have this out, you can turn to one of them or 2 of them. One passage will be from the social sciences. One passage will be from the natural sciences, from physics or biology. One will be from the humanities. And one passage will be from a piece of prose fiction, perhaps part of a short story, that kind of thing, part of a novel. And they are to answer 10 questions. Each of these passages will be followed by 10 questions. This is what we call a 4-corner test. Everything they need to know is on the page. Unlike the math, where they have to bring in their own knowledge of math, unlike the English usage, where they have to know rules of grammar, etc., this part of the test, they can't call on their knowledge because every answer is derivable from what they read. In fact, if they start reading, and it's all about playing basketball, and this person happens to be a basketball player, and he or she says, well, this is wonderful. I know how to play basketball. I've played basketball my whole life. In fact, my brothers and sisters played ball for Old Miss. My father coached for the local college team. My mother's a trainer for the basketball team. I mean, the whole family eats and sleeps basketball. I don't even have to read the passage. I'll just answer the questions. Wrong. The questions are answerable solely by what's in the passage. In fact, if they bring in any outside information that's very specific and very unusual, and only they know, they'll probably get the questions wrong. So it is what we call a 4-corner test. It is a reading test. But it's not a memorization test, as we'll see later. It really requires them to visualize as they read, not to memorize things. They can always go back and look. Most students will not have the time to finish all 4 of these sections. In the time, think about it. They have 35 minutes to answer 40 questions and read the passages as well. If they just had 35 minutes to answer 40 questions, that would be less than a minute a question. And now we realize they have these long passages. And some students might say long, boring passages to read and understand. As we'll see later, some students might do even better by biting off a little less, by not feeling compelled to work through that whole section as fast as they can, but rather slowing down just enough so they can understand and answer the questions well, and perhaps only attempt to do 3 of the 4, but do those 3 out of 4 almost perfectly. And we'll talk about that. And then the last section is science reading, where they are given several, sometimes 5, sometimes 7 passages. The passages are of 3 types. Sometimes it's a very brief passage, but with graphs and charts and diagrams, and they must look at the diagrams or representational information and at a chart and determine from the charts what the answers are. That's one type. Second type is when they give experiments, and they must read about the experiments and then answer based upon the experiments. And the third type is, that was the second type, the third type is where they'll give, for instance, 2 experimenters, and they each have their own unique point of view, and it might be in conflict. So there seems to be a little argument here. One person says one thing, and the other person says something else. Who's right? And what some students tend to do is they tend to take the person, some take the person who ends up speaking. Well, yeah, that's right. And so other people take the primacy, the one they read first, and the questions will not tell you which one is right. They must discover that, in fact, there are 2 differing or conflicting points of view. And the questions will ask you, experimenter 1 believes such and such. Experimenter 2 believes such and such about experiment 1, that kind of thing. And there are 3 types. Some students have found that they're better at certain types. They might want to attempt those first. They do not have to do the sections, excuse me, they do not have to do the questions in any one section in the order in which they come. But they have to stay in that section, and we'll talk about that. Okay, so this is the format of the exam. Every one of those sections is scored from 1 to 36, with 18 being the mean. 18 is the average. That means if you have a student who scores an 18 on one section, that student scored better than half the country, but not as well as the other 50% of the country. Okay? Every one of the subsections, and you can read about this in that little A.C.T., the narrow A.C.T. booklet, will have subscores where students can determine, for instance, on the science, excuse me, on the mathematics, for instance, there are, what do I say? We said there's pre-algebra, which is arithmetic. There's 2 types of algebra. There's geometry and trigonometry. Each one of those will have a subscore. And so a student can very quickly look at the subscores, which go from 1 to 18, and determine where his or her strengths or weaknesses are. I'd like to show you 3 general strategies first that can be used on every section of the test. And then, and most of these you'll know, but you'll be surprised your students won't. You'll show them a strategy that seems common sense to you, but your students will not have been using it in the past. And that's why number 4 was practice, practice, practice. Hopefully your program can give them lots of opportunities to practice under test conditions, so that by the time they go in and take the test, these strategies are second nature. They're old hat to them. If they just learn the strategies and listen to you and watch you use them, and don't practice them, they'll go in and take them on the test. It probably will slow them down because they won't be second nature. They should have time to practice either at home, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, giving them things that they can do at home. The first strategy works something like this. I'll go through it very quickly because it is such common sense. They're given a question booklet and an answer sheet. And by the way, your booklet here has an answer sheet in it, which, there it is, which your students should at this point be familiar with. We encourage, in all our programs that we do, we encourage, whenever they take a practice test, we encourage our students to use the practice sheet, so that it's second nature transferring answers. When they take a test, it's second nature. They don't even have to think about it. When they skip problems, it's second nature. They've developed their own way of keeping a finger here and a finger there, and they can just go back and forth. So these are good to Xerox or give to your students. Let us say we're doing the math part of the test. Section 2. Proctor will say something like, you have 60 minutes to do the 60 questions in section 2. You may not go ahead to section 3. You may not go back to section 1. You may begin. Here's your average student. Let's see, square root of 16, square root of 16. Square root of 16 equals, let's see, 1 times 1 is 1. 2 times 2 is 4. 3 times 3 is 9. 4 times 4 is 16. Answer is D. Okay. Let's go, Old Miss. Number 2. According to the Pythagorean theorem, the sum of the squares of the 2 sides of a... According to the Pythagorean theorem, some of the squares... According to the Pythagorean theorem... The Pythagorean theorem, is that some sort of disease? I don't seem to remember that from when I took geometry. Now, this student will now start sweating a little. This student will be worried, gee, number 2, if I can't do number 2, aren't standardized tests progressively more difficult as you go through the questions? If I can't do number 2, I'm going to have a lot of trouble with number 6 and even more trouble with number 12. And that's the first thing, is to let your students know that number 2 could be the hardest question on the section, because the questions on the A.C.T. are scrambled in difficulty. While they think this one is difficult and have no idea how to do this one, question 50 might be jumping up in the air saying, do me, I'm easy, I'm easy. But the problem with most students is that they will spend 2 to 3 minutes trying to do number 2. They feel compulsive about getting, especially the ones at the beginning. They feel, the questions at the beginning, they feel compulsive about getting them done. And if you talk to any student who had a difficult time with an A.C.T. exam, they will tell you, I ran out of time. I didn't see the last 15 questions on the math. I didn't see the last passage and a half on the English. I didn't see, why? Because they spent 3 minutes worrying about number 2. And of course, as they're worrying, they sort of sneak a look at the person next to them. The person next to them is turning pages, having a great time, you know. The person next to you always looks like Albert Einstein, you know. This student will be now considering alternative careers. You know, well, maybe college isn't meant for me, you know. What you must impress upon your students is this. As soon as they get to a question that they don't know how to do, don't do it. Immediately, and the key word is immediately, put a mark on the booklet. You're allowed to write all over the question booklet. Put a mark. Our mark for an impossible question is minus. Minus means impossible, heart attack, I can't do it. Now, if they had spent 3 minutes and then realized I can't do it, not only have they used up the minute that normally would go to that question, but they've used up 2 minutes that should go to 2 other questions. If, however, they can skip this in 20 seconds, immediately size it up. I didn't know it in 8th grade. Quadratic equation. I didn't know it in 8th grade. I didn't know it in 11th grade. I don't know it now. If they can say that in 20 seconds, what have they done? They've saved 40 seconds that would normally go to that one that they can put somewhere else. But at this point, they should move over to their answer sheet and take a guess. If they have a boyfriend named Bob, they have a dog named Bowser, they have a sister named Betty, if they drive a Buick, guess D. Actually, it doesn't matter what. By the way, you can laugh, even if this is on tape. If I say something funny, you know, you should feel, you know, we can loosen up here. But the key is, it doesn't matter what they guess, but they should fill in a guess. And the reason why they should fill in the guess is because unlike the S.A.T., unlike the graduate management admission test, unlike so many standardized tests, the A.C.T. is special because they don't take off for mistakes. They don't take off for wrong answers. If a student makes a wrong answer, nothing happens. It just isn't scored. Whereas on the S.A.T., if they put in a wrong answer, they get minus a quarter of a raw point. So if they don't know how to do a problem, they should immediately skip it, and I mean 20 seconds, 30 seconds, get out of there, take a guess, and go to the next question. Now, another reason why they should take a guess, and you're probably way ahead of me on this, is if they leave it blank, and then they can do number 3, and the answer to number 3 is A, they might take the number 3 answer and put it in the number 2 slot, and all their answers move up, right, and they get a worse score. Although some students get a better score if all their answers move up into the wrong slots. Hopefully that's not your students, right? So the key is to immediately fill in an answer. Then they get to number 3. Now suppose number 3 takes them a minute and a half. Normally they don't have a minute and a half a question. They have a minute to do every question. But, and normally if they spent a minute and a half on every question, they'd come up 20 questions short, 15 questions short. But if they skip this one in 20 seconds, this impossible heart attack question, they've picked up 40 seconds that can be applied somewhere else. And if this one takes a minute and a half, they're not behind schedule, they're ahead of schedule. And that is the key to taking this test. To stay away from the terrible questions. Realizing that you're not expected to do all the questions, pick off the easy ones. They're worth the same amount of points as the hard ones. Why spend time on the hard ones when you can get the same credit for the easy ones? And what they'll discover is question 46 is easy, and they can do it in 20 seconds. And question 49 is even easier. They can do it in 14 seconds. And they'll be very happy and very confident about their test-taking ability, and their scores will increase. But if you talk to any student who did poorly on the test, it's because they spent too much time on the impossible questions. Now, here's the hard part for students. Suppose they get to number 4. We've done these 3. We get to number 4, and number 4, they start working on it. It takes them a minute. It's taken them 2 minutes. They know they can get the answer, but it's going to take them a few more minutes. It's a doable question, but time-consuming. Should they do it? Well, think about it. You spend 3 or 4 minutes a question, you're only going to get 15, 20 questions right, which isn't even half of the questions. You're going to get below an 18 on that section, even with some of your guesses being lucky. That's the hardest thing for students to do, to bail out on the possible but time-consuming questions. That's where practicing with them will be very effective. As soon as they start working on a question, they realize it's time-consuming, I can't spend 4 minutes on it now, 3 minutes. So you put plus. Plus means possible, time-consuming. I'll come back to it later. But now you put in a guess, whatever the guess happens to be for the day. And so what will happen is your student's question booklet will look like this. It has plus and minuses, but there'll be an answer filled in for every question. And what will happen is they'll get down to number 46, and they'll be able to do it in 20 seconds. And they'll get to number 49, and they'll be able to do that in 20 seconds. Questions that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to get to. And then they'll look up, and maybe 50 is terrible, and they put a minus, and they look at the clock, I got 20 minutes left. Now, in the first pass, they picked off all these ones. Now they can come back and do the time-consuming ones. Now if it takes 4 or 5 minutes to do that, now it's worth their while. And they'll do as many time-consuming as they possibly can. And if they need to erase, they should be very careful when they erase, because if they do something like this, if they erase this one and put the B answer in here, the machine, even though it's obvious to you and me and all the world they meant this one to be the correct answer, the machine will pick up number 2 graphite here and here and mark them wrong. So that's another reason why they should practice with an answer sheet to get used to erasing completely. If they have any time left over in that section, they can try their impossible questions. Sometimes, now their math juices are flowing, or whichever juices, the English juices, and now this doesn't seem as terrible. Or if they don't want to go back to their minuses, at least press upon them how important it is to spend all the time working on the test. Go back to the ones they thought were easy, just to make sure they didn't make a careless mistake. And that strategy, while you and I may be saying, well, so obvious, is infrequently used by students. The better students, the best students use it. But so many students don't. I encourage you to impress upon them how important it is. The directions on the A.C.T. do not just say choose the perfect answer or choose the correct answer. Anyone know what the directions on the A.C.T. say? Not choose the perfect answer, not choose the correct answer. Thank you. Choose the best answer. Well, sometimes best is not a happy answer. I think back to my social life when I was dating 4 or 5 people. The best was perhaps the least miserable of the 5. I tell you a lot about my former social life. That's going to happen to them occasionally. They're going to have in their mind exactly what they think the answer is, and it won't be there. And that's why, now on math, not so much. That won't happen. That will not happen as often. But it will happen to them on the reading comprehension part and on the science part. And that's why the following strategy is very effective. This is what we call the elimination strategy. Suppose they read the passage, and since they're all educators, let us suppose the passage is about teaching high school students how to read. So it's a social science type of question about education, teaching high school students how to read. And there are 5 answers. And let us say the question reads, which of the following is the most appropriate title for the passage above? You've all seen that type in your past travels. So it's all most appropriate title, easy. They're thinking, teaching high school students how to read, or teaching reading in high school, or the teaching of reading to high school students, something like that. Well, there's a very good chance that answer is not going to be here. Answer A, teaching high school students how to do mathematics. What do you think? No, it's wrong. It wasn't addressed. That's one of the most common wrong answer choices. It wasn't addressed. NA, never addressed. With their pencil, they should take their pencil and cross out the A on their booklet, in their booklet. B, teaching reading in the schools. What do you think? She over here, she's going, you're not in love with it, but isn't it better than A? It's too general, a little too general, but it's better than A. It's the best we have so far. So you put a question mark, or they put a question mark. Now, of course, they're doing this much more quickly when they're taking the test, but this is the process. C, teaching reading to elementary grade students. What do you think? No, elementary grade is off, is wrong school, that's wrong. Next one, teaching an important high school subject. Possible, right? Reading is certainly important. Next one, real estate hunting in Jackson. Now that one's wrong, okay. At this point, the students can say it's either B or D based upon what the focus is up here. If it's mostly about reading, you go with the reading answer. If it's mostly about an important high school subject, you go with the, but at least at this point, your students have a guess. They have a 1 out of 2 guess, which is better than when they started. And at this point, they should take the guess and feel real good about it. In fact, if they get 21 out of 2 guesses on this test, they'll probably get 10 more questions right. Unless they're terribly unlucky, in which case, they maybe want to choose another profession because they'll get all the worst classes, all the worst students, and they'll have a terrible time. But this is what they should do. Now, the reason why this is important, because this is a speed test. Here's what students tend to do if they don't cross out. They know they're looking for an answer that should say, teach high school students how to read. So they do something like this. They go, no, that's not it. No, that's a little too general, which is what you were doing before. You go, nah, I'm not real crazy about it. Nope, no, not really. Nope, gee, I better look at these again. Nope, not really. Nope, nope, I better look at these again. Nope, not really. They could be doing this all day, and a lot of students do. They look at the same things 3 times, all of them. Well, what have they done? They've wasted all this time. If they spend 10 seconds on this, looking at it again, and 10 seconds again on this, they've wasted 20 seconds on that one question. 20 seconds a question. If they do it just 10 times, they've wasted 200 seconds. 200 seconds is over 3 minutes. Ask any student, would you like an extra 3 minutes on the A.C.T? They'll say, of course. Well, that's how you get it, by doing this and not reconsidering choices. Of course, some students love this technique so well, they get carried away with it. They do something like this. They go, ha, ha, A is wrong. No way. You're out of there. B, no way. C, wrong. D, E, no. Well, this is not a strategy we recommend, eliminating all the choices. If they did this, they probably misread the question, which brings us to our next strategy, which is a very important strategy. And this strategy, it's not so much a strategy, it's just a technique. Studies have shown that most students, when they take a standardized test, will make about 2 or 3% errors, not because they don't know how to do a problem, but because they misread something, what we call misreads. Not miscalcs, misread. They misread something in the problem. They know how to do the problem. They've worked the problem. They spend a minute or so working it, but they still get it wrong because they misread something. For example, let me give you just a very simple math question. And those of you who don't teach math, hang in there. We'll be doing the other disciplines in a bit. Some students will look at this and say, oh, it's easy. If 3x plus x equals 20 plus 4, that's elementary algebra. I remember I did that I repeated elementary algebra 6 times. I know how to do that. Let's see. If 3x plus x equals 20 plus 4, well, a mathematician would never say 1x. A mathematician would never say 1 chair. Mathematicians would say 3 chairs plus chair. And that's essentially what's going on here. 3 x's plus another x. And even if you don't teach math, or forget your algebra, which we may have taken 20 years ago, you should know that 3x plus x equals 4x. So this side of the equation is 4x, and that's something that you should be able to compute fairly quickly. 20 plus 4 is 24, okay. They don't let you use calculators on the test yet, although they said they're going to do it on the S.A.T. in a few years. 4 times x, whenever a number and letter are next to each other, it means multiply. So 4 times x is 24. Some students immediately realize x is 6. Other students go, well, it's an equation. Whatever you do to one side, you got to do to the other to keep it balanced. Let's see, get rid of this 4. We've got to divide this side by 4. But if you divide the left side by 4, you got to divide the right side by 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1, but you never write 1. You just simply say x is 24 divided by 4, 6. Answer A. And you're sitting there going, no. And the reason why the answer is not A, as I think just about everyone in here can see, is that the question didn't say what's x. The question said if all this gobbledygook is true up in the top, what is x plus 2? But when they take the test, they won't be sitting comfortably, even though you've had a long day, and looking at one question. They will be sitting with their career on the line, their academic career on the line, looking at 60 questions. And the questions won't be in letters 4 inches tall, they'll be in letters tiny. And they'll have just taken the usage part of the test, and they'll be worried about that. And the person behind them will be humming and tapping his pencil, and they'll be distracted by that. And so it's very easy to miss the fact that the question says, what is x plus 2 more? So the right answer is actually 8. And I hope you see why. And that's why it's important when students read a question that they focus in on what they ultimately have to solve for. And when they find it, they should circle it. Take advantage of being able to write on this test. If all this is true, then, x plus 2 is what I ultimately, finally have to solve for, not just x. And if that saves them 3 or 4 careless mistakes, misreads on this test, it will improve their score significantly. And they should do this on the reading. If it says, based upon the passage above, the author would most probably disagree with which of the following. Based upon the passage above, the author would most probably disagree with which of the following. What would you circle in that question? Based upon the passage above, the author would most probably disagree with which of the following? There it is, disagree. Author disagree. You can just circle the word disagree, or you can circle author disagree, and now you know you're looking for the opposite point of view, what the author wouldn't agree with. And all that verbiage has been refined down to the ultimate question, author disagree. Which of the following is the smallest angle of the triangle? Yeah, smallest angle. So you don't solve for the largest one, which some students do, and you know the largest angle is down there in the answers. We encourage people to spend the extra 2 or 3 seconds to focus in on what they ultimately have to solve for and circle. Okay? Everyone okay on that strategy? That will work on every part of the test, except, I take that back, it won't work on the usage, as you'll see, but it will work on the 3 other parts. Roman numeral questions are, I won't say they're frequent, but they appear commonly on this test. They may have a dozen or so of these. Most students will tell you Roman numeral questions are their nemesis. They will tell you, oh, they're always so hard, they're confusing, I can't do them. And actually, Roman numeral questions are the easiest questions on this test if they know how they work. And if they know how they work, they'll know a terrific strategy, and they will warmly embrace them when they have to take this test. What I'd like to do is walk through this first with you the way a typical candidate would do it, and then show you how a very wise A.C.T. candidate could work this question. First it says, which is an even number? I'm looking for even numbers. Circle it. Number 1, that's 2 is an even number. Number 2 is 7. That's odd. That's an odd number. 3. Is that a number? 0 a number? 0 odd or even? At this point, students usually get very upset and they bail out. Well, in fact, 0 is considered an even number. Okay, so the answer is 1 and 3 are even numbers, and the answer is E. That's the way most students would do it, if in fact they know all 3 of these. I want to show you what your students can do when faced with a dozen or so questions like this. And of course, if they know nothing about math, they couldn't do it anyway. So again, remember, these strategies will only work if they have the basic skills. But if they have the basic skills, these strategies will enhance their basic skills. Suppose a student looks at this and says, I know that 2 is an even number. 7 is not even. And then they get down to this one and they say, what? 0? I don't know what to do. And they put a question mark. Watch what this student can still do. 1 is true. 1 is correct. Therefore, the correct answer must contain a Roman numeral 1. Anything without a 1 is out. As soon as they know 1 is correct, the answer could be 1, 1 and 2, 1 and 3, 1, 2 and 3, 1 and 5, 1 and 9, 1 and 12. There were 12 Roman numerals, which there never are. There's usually just 2, 3, or 4. But everyone see that since 1 is correct, the right answer has to have a 1 in it. What can they eliminate? B and C. B and C are out just from this piece of information, right? Conversely, 2 is false. Anything with the 2 is out. Right? Just from this. 2 is false. 2 is wrong. Anything with a 2 can't work. What can they eliminate now? D. At this point, just from those 2 pieces of information, they got a 1 out of 2 guess. It's either A or it's E. And that's a wonderful guess to have on the A.C.T. If they, as I said, they get 21 out of 2 guesses, they'll probably get 10 more questions right. Whereas if they get 21 out of 5 guesses, they only get 4 questions right, less than half of 10. So at this point, they've done themselves a great service on this question, which they otherwise might have just skipped by not knowing this part here. All right, we're going to look at the 4 parts of the test and talk very specifically about each of them. The first part of the exam, which your students will face, is the English usage. And as I mentioned very briefly earlier, there are 75 questions, 40 of which are questions requiring them to identify errors in usage, diction, sentence structure, grammar, 35 of which are rhetorical type questions, questions that ask them to understand the organization of a passage, the intent of a passage, the meaning of a passage. And what I would like to do is very briefly show you a few of the rules of this question type and then give you a 6-minute practice test. Let you try it on your own. I know after a hard day in the classroom, you're just ready for something like that, but we're going to do it anyway. What's going to happen is there's going to be a passage on the left side, left column, and parts of this passage will be underlined. There'll be phrases underlined. This underlined phrase, number 1, may be incorrect based upon its sentence structure, usage, grammar, diction, as we mentioned before. Or it may be correct. If it's correct, and it's correct usually about a fifth to a quarter of the time, the first answer here will read no change. And if there's no problem with it, they choose no change. Now, if your students have half no changes, they're missing something somewhere. It's typically about a fifth to a quarter no change. If, in fact, there is some sort of error there, they must correct it. For instance, if it says, the dogs is walking, Obviously, we have a subject-verb problem. What they do then is they take their cue from what is not underlined. Anything not underlined is etched in stone, is correct. So if the dogs is not underlined, then of course this should be are walking. And they should choose the B, C, D. There'll be only 4 choices here that will correct this passage, this phrase. Sometimes this test will do this to them. It may say, the Rotary Club applauded Tom and I for our work in helping the community. And they'll have Tom and I underlined. Rotary Club applauded Tom and I. And the student will say, the pronoun I. Would you say Rotary Club applauded I? No. You need the objective form of that. It should be the Rotary Club applauded me, and therefore the Rotary Club applauded Tom and me would be a correction. However, they might have as one of their choices, the Rotary Club applauded Tom and me. First one will be no change. B could say Tom and me. But C might say both of us. And D will say something else. Some students might say, well, both of us looks good. Both of us is grammatically correct. Both of us is grammatically correct, but it changes the meaning of the original intent. The original intent was specifying the 2 people, Tom and, well, they said I, which is grammatically incorrect, but it should be Tom and me. If a student chooses both of us, even though it's grammatically correct, the student has changed the original intent, the meaning has changed, and therefore it is incorrect. So the first concern is grammar, of course. It's got to be correct, follow the correct norms of standard written English, and standard written English, not spoken English, written English. And second, it must, if you're given 2 choices that are in fact correct, they should go for the one that retains the original meaning intended. Because some of the choices will be correct, but they'll significantly change the meaning. So there are the 2 concerns. And of course, anything not underlined is considered to be correct. Okay? Some of the preparation materials that are on the market, and ours included, say that one technique on doing this section is to read everything first. Read the whole passage first. The passage might be 5 paragraphs. Get to number 16 and a new passage will start. But to read that whole passage first and then go back and find the errors. I personally believe that that will be too time-consuming for most students. I encourage them to read a paragraph or halfway through a paragraph and then to make their corrections. And as you'll see, we're going to take a test in a minute, reading the whole thing might not allow them enough time. Now, ideally, it would be terrific to be able to read the whole thing and then go back and find the errors, because they then have a sense of what's going on overall, and they can answer the rhetorical questions much more easily, but I feel it may not be time effective. So to give you a better idea, we've been talking theoretically here, we'll give you a better idea of what we're talking about, I'd like you to take out your A.C.T. prep guide and turn to page 148. And you see on page 148, we have an answer sheet. And I know you've had a particularly hard day today. I'd like you to take this opportunity to relieve yourself of some of the frustrations you had today. Get out your aggressions by ripping out this answer sheet right out of the book, like that. And this is also where we can determine who are the primary grade teachers and who are the secondary grade teachers, because the primary grade teachers will have a very nice rip, you know, no trouble cutting and pasting. This is not a kindergarten teacher, ladies and gentlemen. This is not a cut and paste teacher. This is a secondary grade teacher. And I would like you to do only the first passage. It starts with number 1, it goes to number 13. When you set up practice exercises in your workshops, they don't have to be a complete section. They can be something like this, where you give them a battery of 13 questions in the appropriate amount of time. Try and duplicate test conditions as we just did. An answer sheet, a book. If they're going to make any marks, they can mark all over this book, but they can't use scratch paper. And we like to tell our students that if they really want to practice at home under time conditions, you know, don't spread out at the kitchen table with the Coke or Pepsi and soothing music or rap music on the radio. Do it like we did it here. And if they really want to duplicate test conditions, have their boyfriend or girlfriend while they're practicing, and that'll make it more like the actual exam. Another joke, long day. Anyway, let's go over these. Directions. In the left-hand column, you will find passages in a spread-out format with various words and phrases underlined and numbered. In the right-hand column, you will find a set of responses corresponding to each underlined portion. If the underlined portion is correct, standard written English is most appropriate to the style and feeling of the passage, or best makes the intended statement, mark the letter indicating no change. And as I said, about 25% will be that no change answer. If the underlined portion is not the best choice given, choose the one that is. For these questions, consider only the underlined portions. Assume that the rest of the passage is correct as written. You will also see questions concerning parts of the passage or the whole passage. Choose the response you feel is best for these questions. Your students should know these directions inside and out when they take the exam, so that they can skim this very quickly and then get right to the questions. They should have no doubt about what these directions. Passage 1, notwithstanding its scientific excellence, and this is one of the kinds of errors, they may have a punctuation error. However, its ITS, as you know, is the possessive, and therefore its scientific excellence is correct. And answer A is no change. This is a very common type, the possessive error or a possessive situation. They should know that going in. When, for instance, if they had women's rights, they should know where the apostrophe would go on women's rights. Now, many students will say, well, it's plural. It goes after the S because it's plural. You know, and they should know, for example, that the apostrophe is like an arrow pointing to who owns it, the rights of the women, women's rights, that kind of thing. Even though this is plural, the apostrophe goes before the S. They should know these rules going in. Now, you English teachers or literature teachers, if you're going to be doing this, what you can do with the students is, as you work through these practice exams, and as you work through this is an actual A.C.T, and you have a copy of that has been retired, you can start making a list of the kinds of errors they will see on the test. And you will see after you get to about a dozen or so categories, they'll repeat. And the nice thing about having that list is your students will go in and they'll immediately be looking for, they'll know the 12 most common kinds of errors that will be on this test, and they'll be prepared for them. Is A. During the Cold War, a number of American scientists who chose to restrict their cooperation as a protest against Moscow's suppression of human rights. Sentence fragment. That's another common type. And the correct answer is J. During the Cold War, a number of American scientists chose to restrict their cooperation. Because if you say who chose, then there's really no verbal. There's no verb. Right? So the answer is J. Computers. Now, we've just been talking about scientists who choose to restrict their cooperation, and then it suddenly goes to computers are an area in which the Russians are far behind. And I don't know about you, but when I read that, I went, what? What's that doing in there? And in fact, this is a rhetorical type question. The answer is D, omit the underlined portion. So if they're reading as a paragraph, when they get to this, it'll strike them as being inappropriate. However, if they're reading sentence by sentence, they won't. And that's the problem with reading just sentence by sentence. That's why when they read, they really want to read through sentences so they get a sense of the flow of a paragraph. Every paragraph should be one main idea. In fact, we're going to use that when we talk about the reading part of the test. And I'm going to, for our purposes, I'm going to go down to the next sentence where we have an underlined question. What most of them found in the Soviet regime that most disturbed them? Well, English style emphasizes brevity. If you can say something in fewer words and retain the meaning of what you said, that is considered to be more appropriate in English. It's considered to be preferred. And so there's an easier way of saying this, and the easier way is the shortest way, most disturbing in the Soviet regime. What most of them found most disturbing in the Soviet regime was etc. Now notice what I'm doing. I'm reading back in my selections, and you should encourage them to do that. Don't just look for an answer and pick it and go to the next one. Read it back in to make sure it sounds appropriate and it works. Now, if they have any problems, they say, well, I'm not sure about that. They should be crossing out. You know, I definitely know that, for instance, that G is wrong. Cross it out. At least use the elimination strategy to get down to 1 out of 2 choices if they're unsure. So what most of them found most disturbing in the Soviet regime was a contempt for the notion that each individual has intrinsic moral worth, and that, in fact, is a no change. The answer is 5A. By the way, I notice you're sitting there and you're sort of grimacing. Some of you are grimacing every time you know how to receive answers. The best way to receive answers is, regardless of whether you're getting them right or wrong, just smile and nod. It drives the person next to you crazy. You know, the person's going, wrong, wrong, and you're going, right, yeah. You can teach that to your students. Let's get down to I would not normally do it this way, but we're short on time. I want to jump down to the next sentence. Physicists and chemists from universities All over the country agree. Now, even though throughout the country agree might sound better, all over the country is correct. There's nothing grammatically wrong with it. Stylistically, it's not wrong, even though you might say, well, throughout sounds more educated. They're not looking for highfalutin words. All over is correct and can stand. Has no change. The response to the Western scientists from Moscow has been icy silence. Now, if you've been reading this as a paragraph, you realize that now we're coming to a new idea. And whenever you come to a new idea, you want to begin a new paragraph. And this is another one of those rhetorical questions. And I don't know about you, but I find these to be the most difficult. And I think your students will too. Now, because you don't have to get all the questions right, you don't even have to attempt all the questions. If your students determine that these types of problems are most difficult for them, if they find a particularly difficult rhetorical question, rather than spend 3 minutes mulling it over, skip it. Go with your strength. If you find an occasionally difficult question, remember, knowing what you don't know is the key to doing well on the ACT. If they know that this one in particular presents problems, move on. Continuing on very quickly, the release of scientists like Lipa and Sheklikov, who the authorities had imprisoned on vague and unproved charges, might untie the deadlock with, well, the word who and whom is problematic for students. And a nice technique of testing whether who or whom is correct is to replace, anytime you have the word who, if you replace it with they, or he, or her, and if it sounds good and works, who is correct. Or to try replacing it with them, him, they, he, or she. Correction. They, he, or she for the first, and them, him, and her for whom. Notice them, him. Notice the M's. Subjective case, objective case. For example, I'm just going to take out that phrase that uses the who. Who the authorities had imprisoned on vague and unproved charges. Now, let's put in they. In fact, let's rearrange that phrase. We can rearrange it. Just that phrase. The authorities had imprisoned they on charges, or, which sounds better, the authorities had imprisoned them on charges. Notice how it jumps out at you. The authorities had imprisoned them. Because you use the them, whom is correct. And that's a nice little test whenever they are in doubt about who or whom. Just take that phrase, put in they or them, rearrange it if you need to have it make sense, and see which one sounds better. And it always works. And that's a pronoun error. Very common type. So the answer is J. And then the next one says, it might untie the deadlock. This is another error. It's an idiom error. If you use deadlock, you don't use the word untie. You don't untie a deadlock. This is something that native English-speaking people have no difficulty with. They know the idioms. The boy was addicted of drugs. No, the boy was addicted to drugs. If any of your students speak many languages and English is not their first, quite often they miss the idioms. So this one, you don't untie a deadlock, you break a deadlock, which is answer C. So idiomatic expressions will be on this test as well. There is some restlessness already in the predominant Muslim states. Well, if you need a word to describe Muslim, you need an adverb, and so it should be predominantly Muslim. And if you just chose J, it changes the meaning of the sentence. Predominantly Muslim, mostly Muslim. Once again, the grain harvests in Ukraine are expected to be, and you say, wait, grain harvest is singular, so you need a singular verb. There's a subject-verb problem. So it is expected to be, which is D. As small, if not smaller than. When you have an expression as small, it must go as small as. Because if you were to omit the if not smaller, suppose it just said as small last year's. You'd say as small as last year's. Therefore, you have to have as small as, if not smaller than, last year's. You can take out that expression that's in opposition. Whenever a phrase is set off by commas, if not smaller than is set off by commas. You can ignore if not smaller than to see if the first part of that phrase works. Once again, the grain harvest in Ukraine is expected to be as small last year's. It doesn't work. You need as small as last year's. Therefore, as small as, if not smaller than, last year's. And there is, as usual, a dearth of consumer goods in the shops of the cities is correct. So there are 13 questions. I don't know about you, but I find this difficult. You know, and I got into college and got through college, and I think your students will find this kind of thing difficult. But I do believe that if you prepare them for the common question types, and if you go through the rest of this test, you can, after you compile about a dozen or so, you'll see they'll be repeating. You'll get another subject-verb problem. You'll have pronoun reference. You'll have another who, whom. You'll have possessive. After you get a list of about 12, maybe 15, you'll see that 80 to 90% of the questions, of the grammar questions, tend to be that nature, and they can practice those. Okay? I do, however, encourage you to, at one time, give them a full-length. There are 2 practice tests in this book, and there are lots of materials out there. Give them a full-length section so that they'll get used to skipping the 1 or 2 occasionally difficult questions so that they can get a look at the whole thing. In other words, 45 minutes to do a whole section. Even if you're going to start off with batteries, like in here, you can give them one passage, 6 minutes, another passage, 5 minutes. Save another test that's in here for a full 45-minute period, okay? Or assignment for home, okay? So that's a little bit about the English. Again, a big part of doing well on this is knowing the rules of grammar and knowing how a paragraph is organized. First thing your students should do when they read this question is very simple. We mentioned it earlier, is circle what they're looking for. Especially on the math, very important. So I would circle, if I were taking the enhanced A.C.T, circle the K. And there's K again in the equation. Why not circle it there too? Wherever we see K, we'll circle it. If we find any of those K's, we win. So K equals, and now it says this number in parentheses times this number in parentheses. Anyone know what parentheses mean? How about those of you who are not math teachers? Or multiply. It means times or multiply, right? Therefore, can anyone suggest one way of doing this problem? Just want one way. Change 0.75 to 3/4. She says, then all you got to do is multiply the tops and multiply the bottoms. Now, she's from the National Fraction Society. Is there another way to do this problem? Yes. Person is from the American Decimal League says, let's change a half to 0.5, multiplying decimals. There's also another way you can do it. You can take 0.75 and divide by 2. Which way is the best way? Thank you. Look at the answers. In fact, on the A.C.T, the enhanced A.C.T, 5, sometimes 8 questions, the answers will tell you how to do the problem. In other words, if they were all decimal answers, it would be silly to work in fractions. If not silly, it would be more time-consuming because when you get the fraction, then you got to change the decimal, and vice versa. This knowledge of what the answers are will help your students 10 to 15% of the time. That's not a lot for some students, but I say if they can get 10%, 15% more questions correct, it might make the difference between going to the college of their choice or not. Let me show you other reasons why looking at the answers will be important for them. Terrible problem, right? Some people go, oh, later, right? Plus on it, or minus, right? What if your answers look like this? I'm not sure these numbers are exactly right, but you'll get the general idea. Notice what the answer choices tell us. The answer choices are really all the same, with the only exception, the decimal point, right? They're really 810 except for the decimal point. Or another way of talking about this is, in fact, this is a very tiny answer. It's not even 1. This is around 8, this is around 800, and this is around 80,000. Their answers are widely spread, numerically spread. And so they don't have to do any work up here exactly. They simply have to get an estimate of about where their answer is going to be. This answer down here is the Houston Astrodome. It's a huge stadium. This is a Little League field right here, 800 people, or this auditorium. This is 8. This is a committee, and this isn't even 1. Notice the difference in numbers here. And therefore, what can we change this to up here? 2 times 40 makes how much on top? 80 divided by 10. 80 divided by 10 is, it's got to be answer B. And they didn't have to do it exactly. You'd be surprised at how many students will see this and they go, oh, decimals, I'm a great decimal worker. I can do decimals inside out. And they start working the decimals because they know how to do it. And you don't have to do it with decimals. You can do it with whole numbers. This usually happens once or twice on an A.C.T. And if your students get it right because they do it the long way, they're going to waste time that they could be spending on other questions. If they do it quickly and get it right, they will have picked up time. Okay? Everyone see how looking, and by the way, when I say look at your answer choices, I don't mean, spend 30 seconds down here. 3 seconds, just run your eye over your answers. Are they all fractions? Are they all decimals? Too often students don't look at this part of the question when they do a problem. They only look up here. And remind them that their answers give them, in many cases, a lot of information about how to do the problem. Here's another typical problem you see on the A.C.T. What's the area of circle Q? You'll see that on the test. It's basic geometry, intuitive geometry, plane geometry. Anyone remember the formula for the area of a circle? Pi r squared, area equal pi r squared. Probably, if you're not a math teacher, it's probably maybe the only thing you remember from 8th grade or 9th grade, or maybe there's 2 things you remember from 9th grade. Area of a circle equal pi r squared. Well, this is the radius, the distance from the center to the edge. So the radius squared, 5 squared would be 5 times 5 is 25. So now 25 times pi. Anyone remember what pi is? Well, everyone remembers that. Or that's the other thing you remember from, you never use it when you're balancing your checkbook, but you remember 3.14 is pi. So people, oh, 25 times 3.14. So they, in the margin, they're working it out, spending 20, 30 seconds to get 78.026 or whatever. And they look at their answers, and here are their answers. Right? They didn't even have to change pi. The answers were in terms of pi. And so when they got 25 times pi, they could have just picked answer C. That you will see on the A.C.T. We've seen it on every A.C.T. in the last 10 years, and it will be, this kind of question will be on the A.C.T. in the next 10 years. You want to alert your students to that. Look in answers. Look for pi's in answers. Look for decimals. Look for fractions. Let the answers help you determine how you're going to work the problem, how much work to put into the problem. Okay? We can talk, you'll see more examples of this a little later. I want to quickly move to another strategy. Again, we're dealing with the specific strategies that they can use on the math section of the enhanced A.C.T. There's a question that appeared on the test, or one like it, some time ago. Approximate the square root of 1,592. This would be a difficult question if not for the fact that there are answers down at the bottom on the question. And having answers on the A.C.T. is like playing Let's Make a Deal without curtains. And I'm sure you can relate to that, being we're the same age. Whenever I tell it to my students, they go, let's make a deal? What in the world is that? What spaceship did he get off? Well, remember in Let's Make a Deal, Monty Hall would say, do you want to trade the $200 for what's behind door number 1? And you wouldn't know what's behind door number 1. But if you knew that door number 1 was dog food, you'd say, Monty, I don't want the 10. Because the square root of 1592 is approximately not 10. And that's what most people do. They will start with the A. If they don't know how to work the operation, you can work up from the answers. And most students, most candidates for the A.C.T. will start at the A answer, and they'll feel smart that they know at least enough to work up from the answers. Well, that's only half good. Because if 10 doesn't work, and by the way, those of you who are not mathematicians, the square root of a number means what is that? Right? So one student would say, well, 10 times 10 gets me 100. No, this won't work. It's too small. And then they'll go to B and C and D. What they should know about the math part of the test is, almost without exception, the answers are ordered from low to high or from high to low. So watch what happens if instead of starting at A, they start in the middle. Here are our 5 answers, as they have on the math. Suppose they start at C. If 30 is the correct answer, then 30 times 30 should get you real close, should get you approximately 1592. Let's see what 30 times 30 gives us. 30 times 30 gives us 900. Do you think 30 is correct, too big, or too small? Too small. 900 seems too small. Now, if 30 is too small, what else is too small? You got it. So with one plug-in from the middle, they've eliminated 3 choices. They've saved a lot of time, and now they don't have to do both of these. They only have to do one. If they do one and it works, they win. If you do one and it doesn't work, they still win because they just choose the other letter. And in this case, I would do 50 times 50 if I'm on the run, because it's a lot easier than 39 times 39. 50 times 50, 5 times 5 is giving me 25. So 2,500, way too big, the answer is D. And they did it, and I did it with just 2 plug-ins, which is the most you need if you plug in from the middle rather than from the ends. Okay? There are times when they may want to plug in from one end or the other. For instance, if they gave you some numbers and said, which of the following is the smallest number that goes evenly into 393? Well, if you're looking for the smallest number, and you're going to work from the answers, start with the smallest answer. Because as soon as you hit it, you don't have to go any further. It would make no sense to start in the middle and have to work down, right? But for most of the questions on the test where they're going to plugging in from the center will be the most time effective. Okay, now, of course, you may have students who say, wait a second. These answers are widely spread, as we mentioned before. They jump by about 10. They're not 30, 31, 32, 33, 34. They're not bunched together. They jump by about 10. Why can't I change this to 40 and change that to 1,600? 40 times 40, 4 times 4 is 16. And if they do that, encourage them. Say, that's wonderful, because now you have mastery over the test. You realize if with spread out answers, you don't need to do it exactly. You can round this up to 1,600, round this to 40, and that's a wonderful technique. Every one of the questions on this sheet can be done using test-taking techniques. That doesn't mean that all the questions on the test can be done using the techniques. I would, in fact, say that fewer than half of the questions on the test can be done through technique. More than half the questions on the test will require computational, operational mechanics. They must know how to find the area of circles. They must know how to compute negative square roots. They must know how to, because most of the tests are the straight computational questions. But there are many like this. So let's look at number 1. Arnold went fishing and caught a bass weighing 6 3/4 pounds, a mackerel weighing 6.65 pounds, and a flounder weighing 5.5 pounds. How many pounds of fish did Arnold catch? And of course, the first thing your students should do is circle the words pounds of fish, or pounds of fish did Arnold catch, because they could have said how many pounds of bass did Arnold catch, or something like that, right? Identify what the question is. And then what would you suggest would be a way to then continue? I hear you. Check the answers. That's exactly right. And the answers are all decimals, so the next thing to do is to change all the fractions to decimals and then add up the columns. And this is straight from an A.C.T. exam. Okay? Everyone okay on that one? Not too difficult. It's just knowing the strategy, is scanning your answers. Oh, so I work in decimals. Okay, everyone on that one? Number 2. 2 is a very instructive question. A dealer sells Ms. App's car for $2,800. She must pay 12% of the selling price to the dealer and another 12% to reimburse his expenses. How much will Ms. Apt have left after these payments? So what you would circle is how much she has left, right? Not how much she has to pay, but how much she has left. What's the next thing that your students should do? Well, obviously, scan the answers. And if they scan the answers, they see something very instructive. The answers are all about $500 apart. They have a wide range of answers. And because there's a wide range of answers, they're not real close together. They're not 1,121, 1,122, 1,125. They're spread out. And since they're spread out, they don't have to do this one exactly. Remember, taking an A.C.T. is not building a bridge. They don't have to get everything down to the last decimal point, and if they don't, the bridge will collapse. It's, gee, there are 5 answers. Which answer is the winner? And sometimes I don't have to do it exactly because I can find that winner by estimating, as we saw earlier. Notice your answers are $500, $300 difference. At this point, let's see, she has to pay 12% and 12%. Well, 12% and 12% together is 24%. 24% is almost a quarter. That's right, it's almost a fourth. So she's got to pay a fourth of her money. What's a fourth of 28? 7. What's a fourth of 2,800? $700. She has to pay $700. And if she pays $700 from the 28, how much does she have left? 21 something. There's only one answer that's close. Answer H. Now, your students can do it exactly, but if they do it exactly, they're going to do two things. They're going to spend a lot of extra time that they don't have to spend, and they're going to take the chance of making a careless error in their math, a computational error. Okay? So, and when your answer choices are widely spread, numerically, it may be easier just to get a fast estimate and get your answer. Everyone okay on that one? Okay. And by the way, encourage your students to make mistakes. Encourage them to make mistakes in class, in your workshop, because the more they make mistakes in your workshop, the fewer mistakes they'll make on the ACT if they understand why they're making mistakes. So by all means, encourage as many mistakes. Encourage them to call out answers that are wrong, and so they can discover why they're making those errors. And in fact, say the more mistakes you make here, the fewer you'll make when it really counts. I would like to skip to number 6. 6 is a wonderful question. Alice can do a job alone in 2 hours. Betty works twice as fast as Alice. What is the fewest number of minutes in which they can do the job together? And your students should circle fewest number of minutes and together. So notice the first thing here is they must change hours to minutes. Therefore, let's go back to Alice. She can do the job alone in 2 hours. How many minutes is that going to take? 120. So they should write 120 over the word Alice. Betty works twice as fast. If Betty can get the job done twice as fast, she can do it in half the time, which would mean how many minutes? 60. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Betty alone can get the job done in 60 minutes, alone by herself. If Alice helps her and they don't go out for lunch, all right, look at the answers. If they work together, how much time should it take them? That's exactly right. And I didn't see you lift a pencil to get that answer. Do you see what he did and many of you did? 4 of the answers are ridiculous. They're unreasonable. If Betty can do the job herself in 60 minutes, if Alice helps her, it's got to take less than 60 minutes. There's only one answer that's reasonable. If your students keep their eyes on the answers, they will realize several times on the math part of the test that some of the answers just won't work. They're unreasonable. And they can knock them out. In this case, we can knock out 4 of the answers. It's got to be less than 60. The only possible answer is 40. Right? Some students will take the average of the two. They'll say, well, if one person can do it in 60 minutes, the other person can do it in 120, we average the two. Doesn't make any sense. It should take less, right? If 2 people are working on something, it should take less time than what that first person can do it alone. You'd be surprised how many students will argue with you and say, no, the answer is the average of 60 and 120. The answer's got to be 90, which isn't down here. Okay, everyone see that 4 of the answers were unreasonable. That's another reason why they should keep their eyes on their answers as they work. Now, number 7 is a very interesting problem. And I'm going quickly because I don't want to take too much more of your time, because I know it's been a long day for you and you have another one tomorrow. I will read to you what it says on the directions of the math. It says, unless otherwise stated, illustrative figures are not necessarily drawn to scale. Not necessarily drawn to scale. Well, the news is that most of the figures that your students will see on this test are drawn to scale. And if they don't know the mathematical way of working a problem, sometimes, in fact, more often than not, they can actually measure the diagram. The first thing they should do, though, is make sure, as best they can, that the diagram is as close to scale as possible. In other words, let's look at number 7. In the right triangle shown above. Well, right triangle means it must have a right angle. Right angle is a square corner. This is a right angle. Right? Some people think this is a right angle and this is a left angle. No, they're both right angles. It's just that little square corner. So first of all, our triangle has to have one of those, right? In the right triangle shown up below, the length of line segment XZ, that's that line segment, the sloping line segment there, is 10 units. At this point, they should take their pencil and write 10 on the line XZ, which is this line here. They should write 10. They should take advantage of being able to write in the test booklet. They should draw on the diagram. Put a 10 in there. The angle X measures 60 degrees. Where they see the X, they should put 60. Write a little 60 in there. How many units long is XY? And if I were doing this problem, I would then put a question mark on the XY line, identifying what it is I'm looking for. Well, if they don't know the relationship of a 30, 60, 90 right triangle, which is important on this exam, and you math teachers know that there's a certain proportion, 1, 2, square root of 3. Even if they don't know this, they can get this one right, because if they look at this, it is drawn to scale. They know, for instance, that if this is a 90-degree angle, a 30-degree angle will be about a third of that. This is a 30-degree angle, this is a 30-degree angle, this is a 30-degree angle. Look at that 30-degree angle. Does it look drawn to scale? Yes, it does. It looks like about 30 degrees. And the 60-degree angle at the top looks like about this much. Right? One way to do it is to do this. This is 45 right in the middle. So this is about 60. This is about 30. So as soon as they realize that a diagram is drawn to scale, they can take their answer sheet, put it along the 10. You know, this is 10. Put the edge along the 10. And now say, okay, now I have this much is 10. You know, the edge from here to the edge is 10, using their answer sheet as a straight edge. Let's see what XY looks like. Hey, XY looks like exactly half of that. Let's look at our answers. The only answer A is the only possible answer. So for your students who don't know a particular math fact, obviously the ideal way, the fast way is to know the math fact. But for this part of the test, when they give your students a diagram, more often than not, they are drawn to scale, and they can, in fact, measure. You know, it's not the way that I would prefer, you know, my students use, but lacking everything else, it is a technique. Okay? The last one is a wonderful question. On an assembly line, it takes 5/12 of a minute to produce Q items. Students go, Q items? I've heard of Q tips. I've never heard of Q items. You know, Q tips are the things you put in your ears. What are Q items? 5/12 of a minute. Oh, ugly fraction, 5/12. What an ugly fraction. How many items can be produced in the same rate in 2/3 of an hour? And many students skip this one because it looks so terrible. But if you look at your answers, except for F and G, the answers are very widely spaced. Right, F and G are very close. They're tiny. And then it jumps to 96, and it jumps to 108, and it jumps to 144. Watch what we're going to do. Because our answers are widely spaced, let's not use 5/12. What do you know that's real close to 5/12? Thank you. A half. 5/12 is a little under a half, right? So let's change this problem. It takes a half a minute to produce. Ooh, that Q that's messy. Let's make Q. Notice Q is in all your answers. You don't really have to worry about Q. Let's just carry it along. In fact, let's do this. Let's assign a very easy value to Q. What's the easiest number you know? 1. Thank you. In the margin, we'll put Q equals 1. For our purposes, Q equals 1. Wherever you see a Q, it means 1. So now the problem becomes, it takes a half a minute to make one item. At the same rate, how many items can be produced in 2/3 of an hour? 2/3 of an hour is how many minutes? 40. It takes a half a minute to make one item. How many items can you make in 40 minutes? Well, if it takes a half a minute, yeah, you got it already. If it takes a half a minute to make one item, in a whole minute you can make 2. So in 40 minutes you can make 80. 40 times 2, right? It takes a half a minute to make one item. A whole minute you'll have 2 items. So in 40 minutes, you'll have 40 times 2, 80. There's only one close answer, 96. 96 times 1. Now, this is a very difficult problem that we have simplified. And quite often the A.C.T. will take an easy problem and make it more difficult by changing a half to 5/12. For example, look at this problem on the board. Suppose you saw this on a test. Now, this is a difficult problem that's going to require some work. What is 5/12 of 196? But what if your answers look like this? Let's just say those are actually, you'd have 5 answers. Let's put another one here. I'm not sure this is going to work out exactly, but you'll get the general drift. 5/12 is about a half, a little under half. That's close to 200. If it had a half of 200, it would be 100. It's a little under half of 200. What's the only possible answer? 88. You got it. Same type of problem. What's 5/12? A little under half. What's a little under half of 200? A little under 100. There's only one possible answer, 88. Okay? Now, it's not going to get all the answers right for your students, but for the 6 or 10 or so that they see, out of the 60, they will not only get them correct, but they'll have a faster way of doing it. It'll boost their confidence, and I believe give them more time to do the other questions that are time-consuming. Okay, how you doing? Are we having fun yet? We're now going to look at the last two sections of the enhanced A.C.T, the reading comprehension and the science reading. And if you would please turn in your A.C.T preparation guide to page 184. You will see that the reading comprehension passage is comparably long. It's not something that's read very quickly. It's long. This passage looks like a discussion of art. The next passage is a piece of prose, passage number 2. The next passage looks like history. It's about Egyptian tombs. And the last one is science, about freshwater fish. And this is typically what your students will be faced with. Passages from 4 different areas, 4 different disciplines. Let's talk about some of the strategies that you can help your students with. Now, obviously, reading comprehension is something that they need, and it's not something you can help them with in a very short period of time. Reading comprehension is a skill that they've developed over many, many years of going to school. So it's something that you can enhance, but if they don't have the skills of reading, these strategies, again, won't work. Here's one technique to show them, which we tend to forget. Those of us who've been reading our whole lives, 30, 40 years, tend to forget that this is an effective technique, and we take it for granted that our students know it, but many of them forget it, because many of them, when seeing a passage like this, are intimidated by its length and think they should start here and get as fast as they can down to the bottom, because time is a major constraint here. They have to answer 40 questions, read the passages, all in 35 minutes. I challenge you to do that at home. It's not easy. It's difficult getting through these passages. So they feel, I'm going to have to read this breakneck speed. And they think they have to read from here to there. And that is not the way they should be reading. Remind them that these passages don't look like this. They look like this. And they should read like this. And it becomes a lot less intimidating for them if they realize that this is not one long passage of 400 words. This is really 4 paragraphs. Divide and conquer. Is that Caesar's military technique? Somebody's military technique. Well, it works on this part of the test. Realize that what they have here is 4 general thoughts, 4 ideas. Every paragraph has a main idea, and within it, support for that main idea, development of that main idea. And this becomes a lot easier to do for your students than to see this long passage, intimidating passage. So encourage them to read. When they get down to the end of the paragraph, take a very brief mental breath, maybe think, what was that about? Okay, next one. And as they read, it's a good idea to read actively. When they see something they think is important, they should circle it. A key idea, a name, a date. Although students can get carried away. I had a roommate in college who must have owned stock in highlighter pens. All night long, I'd be sleeping. I'd hear squeak, 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 squeak. I'd wake up in the morning, the whole book would be yellow, except for the word of. Of would jump out at them, at me. I'd see, of would be white, everything else would be yellow. Of, Well, if your students do something like this, students say, I don't want to miss anything. It's all important. This is not an effective way of highlighting as they read. 3 or 4 things per paragraph may jump out at them. They should be playful as they read. Things that they think are important. Because the reason for circling is twofold. 1, it keeps them actively engaged as they read. And 2, it organizes the passage for them. Because most of the questions will be reference questions. That means to say, question 1 may say something like, the reason George Washington shot his horse was because. And they go, oh, the part about George Washington and his horse. Let's see. This part is about being president. Oh, here it is, horse. And they don't have to give them the whole thing now. They can just read the highlighted parts. And the parts that stand out, that present information that they felt was important. They get down the horse. Oh, George Washington shot his horse because it threw him in the river, or whatever like that. They can use this to organize the passage. So there's 2 reasons why they should read actively. Besides, if they don't read actively, they might just fall asleep. Keeps them actively involved, helps them focus their attention immediately. not worrying about the questions. Now they're reading for important things, and it also organized the passage. So when they do come back to look for things, and they will, it's not a memory test, not a memorization test, it's passages organized for them. Now, that's a very important distinction. This is not a memory test. Some students think that they have to memorize as they read. Well, comprehension is not based on memorization. It's based on visualization. And there's another strategy that we encourage you to remind your students, that if they're the kind of test taker who reads words, but the words are going in the eyes and nothing else is happening except the person next to them is turning pages, they're not visualizing. They're not seeing in their head what they're reading. Comprehension is based on visualization. For example, if I said to you, if you read the sentence, an insurance negotiation should begin with a warm salutation. An insurance negotiation should begin with a warm greeting. I suspect there's a picture in your head of somebody in a three-piece suit with an attaché case saying, "Hi, my name is Bill Firk, I'm from Prudential, glad to meet you," with a grin on their face. If you envision something like that, you comprehend the sentence. Well, that's the kind of thing that they should do as much as possible on this. And these passages are made for visualization. The more they visualize, the more they understand. So remind them of that. Some students find that if they rush through all 4 of the passages just to get it done, they don't do as well as if they bite off a little less. By that I mean, some students have found that if they take 3 of the passage and read them carefully, of course, they want to read slightly faster than they normally read because it is a speed test, but if they read them not at breakneck speed, but if they take 3 of the passages, maybe the second passage is the science and they have trouble with science, and this particular passage, so they guess on those 10 questions. They don't even try those, but they read this one very well, this one very well, this one very well, and they do so well on these, and they read them so thoroughly that they get 90% right of those 30 questions. 90% of 30 questions is 27. Right? 27 right. They guess on the other 10. They don't even try one of the passages. They guess on the other 10, and if you guess on 10 and there are 4 choices, you should get 2.5 right, 2 or 3 right. So now they've gotten, instead of 27 right, they've gotten almost 30 right. 30 right out of the 40, and they only tried 3 passages. That's 75% correct, which is a marvelous score on this test. Of course, they have to do extremely well on the 3. Some students will do better biting off a little less, but doing extremely well on the 3, than by trying to rush through and crash through all 4. That's something you want to explore with your students, and that's a very important technique that will work only if they practice and see what works best for them. Some students, if they do 3 and don't do them well, will get a worse score. And that's why it's important that they practice and find what works best for them. Okay? Some of the things that you should be aware of when you work through a passage with them. When you explore the correct answer, also look at why the other 3 answers are incorrect. Because what your students will start to learn is that wrong answers are commonly wrong for the same reasons. For example, they will see, we saw it before when we did the elimination strategy 2 hours ago, NA, never addressed. Never addressed is a common reason why an answer might be wrong. The passage might be all about playing ice hockey, in Canada. And it'll say, which of the following is the most appropriate title? Answer A, playing basketball in Mississippi. And some students go, what? Did I miss that? What's the part about Mississippi? And they go back, and they're looking for it. They never mentioned Mississippi. They never mentioned basketball. That's why it's wrong. It's an NA, never addressed. That's a common wrong answer choice. Another common wrong answer choice is a contradiction. What they're saying is just plain wrong. It's the opposite of what they said in the passage. Some students see the opposite there. Perhaps the whole passage is about George Washington actually was not a great leader. Let us say the passage says that. And then they read, which of the following would the author most likely agree with? Answer B. George Washington was a great leader. They go, wait a minute. I thought they said he wasn't a great leader. Why would they say he is a great leader when he wasn't? Well, that's why it's wrong, because it's a contradiction. But many times students see it in print. They see something the exact opposite of what they read. They don't realize that that's why it's wrong, because it's a contradiction. Quite often, answer choices will have absolutes, words like all, never, always, nobody, none. Words that push the choice completely in one direction, 100% one way, 100% the other way. Well, these are about human endeavor. And except for the science, they're about human endeavor. And human endeavor is never black and white. It's many shades of gray. Just because this person does it doesn't mean it always happened. Just because George Washington did it here doesn't mean he shot all its horses or he hated all his animals. So keying them to words like all, never, always, everybody, words that are absolutes, allows them to realize that, hey, this this could be a wrong answer choice. So I encourage you, and you'll see other wrong answer choices, and if you work these with them, you'll see explanations in the back. Every one of these tests are explained. And they can start compiling lists of the common wrong answer choices. Some students find that knowing what the common wrong answer choices are is an easier way to find a right answer than actually looking for the right answer. Knock out the wrong answer choices, and the one that's left is the winner. I would also encourage you to walk them through the science reasoning. And if you will, please turn to page 195, and you'll see the three kinds of science reasoning problems. The science reasoning has, as I mentioned earlier, three different types. Notice the first type on page 195 is a chart, a graph. Encourage your students, before they even look at the questions, to understand very quickly, try and get an understanding of what's going on with the graph, to read the title, to look at the key, to read the numbers, spend 20 seconds, 30 seconds getting a sense of what's going on with the graph. They don't have to understand it completely, just get a general sense of what's going on. The questions themselves will provide a more definitive, more specific direction for them. I also encourage, if you look at the graph on page 197, if I asked you for biotite, the calcium percentage of biotite, most of you would probably say 0, although at this late hour, some of you might say 4, some of you might say 5, because it's way over on the end of the scale. And that's why encouraging your students to use their answer sheet as a straight edge for charts, biotite, there it is, as a ruler. That's one tool that they're allowed to have. Encourage them to use the straight edge of their answer sheet for charts. And as you'll see, if you go through this at home, some of the charts are very big and very complex. And this answer sheet, I'll show you. Look at this one. The answer sheet can significantly help you as a straight edge. That's just an extra technique. On page 198, you'll see 2 experiments. On page 200 are more diagrams. On page 203, there's scientist 1 and scientist 2. The more comfortable they get with this section, the more they will realize which ones they can do well and which ones they can't. And again, as we said earlier, remember when we talked about the math questions, they should skip a particular math question, come back to it later. If they realize that, for instance, the experiments are particularly difficult for them, but the charts aren't, do all the charts first. Then come back and do the more difficult ones. Do the easy ones first. Do what is their strength first. And leave their toughest type to the end. It's a wonderful strategy if, in fact, they put their answers in the correct spaces on their answer sheet. And that's something that comes with practice. So there's no reason they have to do them in the order in which they're given, if, in fact, it's more effective for them to bite off the easy ones first and come back to the more difficult ones. Okay? I think that's it for tonight. The strategies we talked about are only the tip of the iceberg. We only had 2 hours, a little bit more than 2 hours. You'll see when you go through these materials that there are other strategies that you can introduce to your classes. There are other books on the market. Whatever you do for your students, your attendance today will be giving them that much of an advantage to do their best on the test.
For more information about A.C.T. preparation materials, call Cliff's Notes at 1-800-228-4078.